Welcome back to another episode of Math with Sohn. Today we're going to be looking at some of the basic vocabulary that we're going to need for the rest of this school year. So, the three biggest things that we'll need to know about are going to be points, lines, and planes. And the top two are going to be the points and the lines. Now, a point is basically just a dot, okay? And it's a dot that has a specific location, and it technically can be as small as anything can be small. A line is, well, it's a line. It attaches 2 points together, and it's technically has no thickness, but most importantly is what we need to be focusing on is the notation for all of these things. Specifically the line. Most of the time people don't like writing line L or line AB. They like to write AB with a line above it. And if it is a line, it will have arrows in both directions on the left side and the right side like we have here. Now, our third thing is a plane, and that is technically what I consider just a piece of paper. It's like a thin fabric that is stretched out in all directions forever, just like a line. And that would be what you have here in this drawing. And it can be denoted as plane M because M is the only thing that doesn't have a point attached to it, or plane XYZ. If you can use 3 points, you can label the plane like that. And the big thing to take away with the plane is it is flat. Flat as all flats can be. So some other things that we're going to be dealing with is instead of having an entire line, we could have a line segment, which is a portion of a line. Because lines go on forever, line segments are a better version of that because they're shorter and it's only just a little tiny snippet of it. And the notation, look at how it's different. It doesn't have the arrows on top. It has nothing. It's just a basic line without the arrows, and that lets you know that this is a segment, a portion of a line, rather than the entire thing. Right underneath it, we have what we call is a ray, and this is the first one that I feel like maybe nobody's ever really heard of it. An array is a line that only goes in one direction, okay? So I like thinking of it like a sun ray, a ray of sunshine. It originates from the sun, and it only goes away from it. It's not going in both directions. So it starts at one location, and it goes in one location, and the notation is the same as well. And here is the first time where you actually have to be careful where that arrow is going because it is going from M to N, and the arrow is going from M to N, and the arrowhead is above the N, and that is where the arrow is pointing on our ray. And our last one is it's a pair of opposite rays. If you think about two things going in opposite directions like we have here from T to U and from T to S, if you put them together, you end up with a line. So that's just another thing that you can think about is lines can be formed from opposite rays. So we have two other words that we need to know about, and that would be collinear and coplanar. And the co in those words is going to tell us that this involves two or more things. So we have two other words that we're going to be learning about today, that it would be collinear, which means it's going to involve a line, and coplanar, which means it's going to involve a plane. And the co part of that word is going to indicate that we have two or more things. And in fact, collinear is just two or more points that are on the same line. Okay? So I could take a point here, and a third point. If I connect all 3 points together, lousily, if I connect all 3 points together, these 3 points would be what we would call collinear. So we got two other words that we're going to be learning about, and that's collinear and coplanar. And a lot of times with geometry words, the name is going to tell us something about it, and it's no different here. Collinear is going to involve a line, it's in the name, and coplanar is going to involve a plane. And the co in these words is going to involve more than one. So collinear is just two or more points that are on the same line. Are on the same line. And that would look like two or more points. So I'm going to draw a point here, and a point here. And I'm going to just connect them. And these 3 points that I just drew, they would be what we would call collinear. Now, if I had a fourth point way over here, that point is not going to be collinear with the other 3 because it's not going to be on the same line. But one important thing to take from that, though, is if I did draw this point is collinear with any one other point because you can always connect any 2 points to make a line. I could make a line here if I wanted to. So collinear normally involves a situation where you have a bunch of things going on and you're expected to just name some points that happen to fall on the same line, and it normally involves more than 2. Coplanar is the same thing, but instead of it being a line, you take any plane and any points that happen to be on the same plane, like I have here, AB, they are coplanar. So it's 2 or more points on the same plane. And point C that I just made, that would be considered not coplanar with the point A and B. So what does this actually look like? Well, in most situations, you're going to be given a diagram, and that could have lines or planes or even angles on it, which we haven't talked about yet. And they're going to ask some questions. So for instance, in this first one, it says 4 collinear points. So we're going to name 4 points that happen to be on the same line. So I'm going to be looking at my lines, and I'm going to try and find any of those that actually have 4 points on it. And the only one that I can see is this one right here, where we have the H, N, K, and I. Those 4 points are on the same line. R is not a point. That is the name of that line, or one of the names of that line. We could call it a bunch of things. So we're going to say H, N, K, and I there. The next thing we're going to do is name a line that contains point M. Well, point M is here. We could call it line P if we wanted to, because that's the name of that line. Not all lines are named, though. So we could also call it, line MN with arrows above it, because a line has to have arrows. We could have also called it line NO or O and M. We don't have to use any 2 particular letters. We can use them, any 2 that are there. So another example is, I'm going to even go backwards. I'm going to go O to M. The order for lines doesn't matter as long as you have 2 letters that are on the line and the arrows above it. What about a line that contains points H and K? Well, here's H and here's K. So why don't we just call it line HK? Isn't that easy? Don't overthink it. Another name for line Q. Well, line Q is here. So another name for line Q could be any 2 points on it. So I'm going to pick points J and K because why not? It's a joke. JK, make sure the arrows are above it. The intersection of lines P and R. Intersection is where they crisscross. So where is line P? Here's line P, and here's line R. Where they intersect is where they cross, and that is at point N. And I'm actually going to write out the word point this time, because that's the most official way to do it. All right? The next example we're going to have is going to involve a plane. So we have use the diagram on the right to name the following. So we're going to name a line that contains point F. Well, here's point F. We could call that a bunch of things. We could call it line J, line DE, line DF. We could call it a bunch of things. I'm just going to stick with letters and call it line D to E. What is another name for line K? Here is line K. They did that dotted thing right there because it's technically like going through the plane and going underneath it. So that's why it's dotted there. It's kind of like it hidden behind the piece of paper, which we call a plane. So another name for line K could be line BC or CB in either order. I'm going to make it C to B because that's just something different. A plane containing point A. So here is a plane containing point A. The name of this plane is M because that is the only letter that we have there that doesn't have a dot next to it, which means it's the only thing that doesn't actually have a point that it is denoting. That is one name. We could have also called it any other plane with the 3 points that we have on the plane. So I'm going to say A, D, and E. An example of 3 non-collinear points. So I'm on part D here. An example of 3 non-collinear points. Well, 3 non-collinear points are just any 3 points that don't happen to be on the same line. So we could call it B, D, and A. We could call it any 3 points that happen to be not on the same line. So B is way over here, D is on a different line, and A is not on any line at all. And the last thing it says, the intersection of plane M and line K. Well, plane M's this shape right here, this parallelogram actually, and line K is right here. So where is the intersection of those two? That would be where they crisscross and they pierced right there. It went through the plane at point E. So I'm going to label that point E.